Tonight I am starting on chapter 3, Dharma Paths by Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche, and the chapter is titled Refuge and Lay Precepts. To begin here with refuge, Rinpoche says that we have in our lives a mixture of happiness and suffering, but we really don't have much control of what our experience is. He says that our greatest ignorance is not being able to see and recognize our negative emotional patterns and to realize that we can control them, that they don't have to control us. And when we see them, we frequently feel good that we've got them. I remember a friend of mine many years ago, decades ago, saying, I do my best thinking when I'm angry. I think he was a Marine in the Vietnam War. That might have been part of why he's talked that way. But anyway, the problem with anger is that it can lead to rebirth in the hell realm, and that greed can lead to rebirth in the Preta realm or the hungry ghost realm. And there's huge amounts of suffering in both of those realms. And jealousy and pride cause emotional upheavals. And again, I remember many years ago when I first got involved with Buddhism and meditating, a man said with a grin on his face to me, I used to be proud that I wasn't arrogant. So these things can be very subtle and, shall we say, they're on a slippery slope. We're used to having these kleshas present. We think that they arise spontaneously. Our failure in this case is A, it's causing us to suffer and we don't want to suffer. And B, we don't have the proper support to help us gain control of our kleshas, our confusion, and to reduce our suffering and to increase our level of happiness. Now, the good news is that we're in a good place now, that we have access to the teachings and teachers. We've got some very good teachers that are available to us, and we need to turn to these enlightened sources of refuge for their support and guidance. Rinpoche compares us before you take refuge to be like a leaky cup, that no matter how much virtuous activity you engage in and you pour into this cup, that there'll be no lasting benefit because it leaks out. If we had a cup that didn't leak, we'd be much further along the path by now. Here is a quote: to make our lives meaningful at this time, we must engage in virtuous activities under the guidance of the appropriate sources of refuge. So these are the qualities of an appropriate source. One, completely transcend our shortcomings. An appropriate source of refuge has the ability and the enlightened qualities to help us. So, of course, the Buddha, the Dharma, meaning the teachings of the Buddha, and the Sangha are the appropriate sources. So people will go to other things in samsara for security, but they are of no real help. Examples would be nature, technology, medicine, government, money. Well, I don't have to talk about government, but technology too. First of all, much of it is way beyond me. And I see some real downsides of some of the technology that has been developed. Let's say nuclear weapons, for instance, or even social media. It can be used in very, very negative ways. And because of AI, I actually watched a video. It just came up in my suggested list. And I'm not into the Second World War and don't watch videos on the Second World War, but this caught my attention because it was about how nice the Americans treated captured German prisoners of war. And at one point, the uniforms of the Americans, well, they had the appropriate insignias on them. If you look really closely, on some of them, they had insignias of the Third Reich. Talk about AI. It's like, how can you trust anything on YouTube or social media? You don't know the source. Now, this is kind of funny, but the other day I got a phone call and my caller ID said it was from Russia. So I didn't answer it. It turned out, because they left voicemail, it came from a company in the Eau Claire area. And somehow or another, my caller ID had put a space. My area code is 715, and it put a space between the 7 and the 15, and the country code for Russia is a 7. And that's how it came up, Russia. But, even simple mistakes like that can happen and cause a lot of confusion. So none of these things are sources of refuge, at least permanent refuge. So now Rinpoche lists the stainless qualities of the three jewels. The Buddha, his quality is an awakened mind, this all-pervading wisdom and omniscience. And the Buddha also is an example of the possibility that we can attain these qualities too. Now, the Dharma, again, these are the teachings and the methods used to travel the path and the means for developing loving kindness and compassion. And these are crucial to traveling the path, is developing completely loving kindness and compassion. The Sangha, there are different levels of the Sangha, the meaning of Sangha. Here it is our virtuous spiritual friends. Now we're talking about the realized Sangha. And these are people that have reached a state where they're no longer overwhelmed by the kleshas. So this means that they're on the bhumis and are bodhisattvas. And the bhumis are the 10 bhumis. The first one is the realization of emptiness. And with that realization, you are automatically on these bodhisattva levels. So the Buddha is the ultimate refuge. And the Dharma and the Sangha are temporary sources of refuge. When you become enlightened, when you become a Buddha, you do not need the Dharma or the Sangha. You have become the ultimate refuge. So there are different levels of mental capacity that beings have, and our determination, our motivation, our exertion will lead to different results. So here are some different motivations for taking refuge. The one is wanting a safer, better life in this lifetime. Second is wanting a human birth and good health and wealth in the next lifetime. A third would be wanting liberation from suffering for oneself, which is the Hinayana or the foundation level motivation. The fourth is wanting liberation for all sentient beings, as well as their temporary happiness. And this, of course, is the Mahayana, as well as the Vajrayana approach. Here are some points that were brought up in the question and answers section of this part of the chapter. In the Hinayana approach, the Buddha, we take refuge in the person who became enlightened in Bodh Gaya. The Dharma is his teachings on the Four Noble Truths. The Sangha is four or more practitioners of his teachings. And refuge will last until you die. The motivation is liberation from your suffering. And it's a physical transmission of the vows. Now, the Mahayana is the Buddha is the physical Buddha, but that lived in India about 2,500 years ago, but also the three Kayas, the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya. The Dharmakaya is a formless body. So a body I'm going to put in quotes because there's no body. And no one is aware of the Dharmakaya when you reach that level, but you. But from the Dharmakaya emanate two form bodies. The Sambhogakaya are these deities that we practice, like White Tara, Chenrezi, and so forth. And they are really visible only to bodhisattvas. And then the form kaya, the nirmanakaya, is this physical body of the Buddha that lived in India 2,500 years ago. Now, the Dharma here on the Mahayana level is all the teachings that the Buddha gave, including those on emptiness. Well, I should say up to and including those on emptiness, because this does not include the Vajrayana teachings. The Sangha are bodhisattvas on the 1st to the 10th level, and the duration is until you reach enlightenment. The motivation is to liberate yourself and all sentient beings, and it's a mind transmission. So it is transmitted from the wisdom mind of the enlightened ones to your mind stream. And so when I give refuge, I'm doing it, you might say, with the assistance of the lineage that I received refuge in and received training in how to give refuge. Needless to say, I was not permitted to perform a refuge ceremony until after completing the 3-year retreat, and then I received some training on how to do it. Now, the Vajrayana here is the outer sources of refuge are above, plus we have the inner sources of refuge, our body, speech, and our mind. And we connect them to the outer sources of refuge. And this helps ripen our innate Buddha nature. And again, the duration is until we attain enlightenment. Motivation is the same as Mahayana, and it's a mind transmission. Again, the wisdom mind of enlightened ones is transmitted to our mind. So then, why is going for refuge so important? It's a remedy for our ignorance. So recognizing the 3 jewels as enlightened sources of refuge and linking ourselves to them is this remedy for ignorance. The second is a remedy for aggression, anger, and hatred. When we're going for refuge for the benefit of all sentient beings, we are more concerned about loving kindness and compassion, and they are the remedy for anger and hatred. And it's a remedy for selfishness and attachment because we're developing a sense of concern for others. So, as I said, there's an unbroken lineage back to the Buddha that the preceptor is, you might say, that is behind the preceptor, the person giving the refuge vows. It's important to contemplate how fortunate you are in being able to receive refuge. And I have said this a number of times recently in my talks. It's good to check in with your teacher from time to make sure you are practicing properly. These interviews with your teacher should be primarily concerned with how you're practicing. And if you don't tell me right off the bat, I will ask, what is your practice schedule and how is it going? And it's important to not get discouraged when you don't see the results of your practice right away. This comes from the Zen tradition. It's a saying, but I really like it. And it is hasten slowly, that things can happen slowly and you don't necessarily see the results that you would like to see. But if you're practicing properly and regularly, little by little by little, you are accumulating merit and you are weakening your afflictive states of mind or your kleshas. I think that is good enough for right now. I want to go into the lay precepts. The lay precepts or vows are to give us space to live in the mundane world. These lay precepts are for people that are not monastics, and they are of great benefit for ourselves and for others. And just with the refuge vows, the preceptor who holds the transmission of these vows in an unbroken line. And when we receive the lay vows and promise to live up to them, then we have connected with this unbroken lineage that goes back to the Buddha. And I can give lay vows. It's been a while since I've done it, but I can give lay vows. Lama Karma can give lay vows too. So there are 4 types of lay vows, or there are sojong vows, which last for 1 day. They can be renewed the next day, but they expire at sunrise the next day after they are given. And they can be given during auspicious times. I used to do Nyungne here, and during the Nyungne, there would be Sojong vows early in the morning. Another type of vows are you have both the Tibetan words and the Sanskrit words. The Tibetan words, Gen Yen Pa and Gen Yen Ma. Pa is masculine, Ma is feminine. So lay vows for men and lay vows for women. Again, they can last for a lifetime or they can last until enlightenment. And there are bodhisattva vows. They last until enlightenment. And then there are the Samaya vows of Vajrayana. And I'm not going to talk too much about the Vajrayana Samaya vows. At this point, Rinpoche doesn't either. But all these vows are built on the refuge vow, and they are progressive and they are interrelated. I try to stay away from these technical terms, but these are in the chapter, so I'm going to use them. And I pronounce these words with a Wisconsin accent, and I probably sound like a hick to a Tibetan. But Pratimoshka, Pratimokasha. These are vows of individual liberation. So refuge vows, sojung vows, lay vows, and they can be taken either on the Hinayana level or the Mahayana, depending on our motivation. But if they're on the Hinayana vow, then they're individual liberation. If it's the Mahayana, then we have the motivation to bring all sentient beings to liberation. In Rinpoche's words, this is, I think, a good quote to explain this. First, we must have the ground, then the foundation, and after that, we build the first floor, the second floor, and so forth. Once the house is built, we can make it more beautiful by painting and decorating it artistically. So the point being that all these different vows, these 4 vows that I've just talked about, are progressive. You start with one, and then you add another, and then another, and another, and eventually you have this metaphorical house built, and now you can decorate it artistically. So discipline is extremely important, that you attain a precious human birth through discipline. And what makes human birth precious is you have come in contact with the Dharma, met excellent teachers, and are interested in the Dharma. By following discipline, keeping these vows, you accumulate less negative karma and you accumulate more merit and wisdom, and you remove obstacles. So discipline is very important for us to travel the path and to have precious human births in the future. So there are 5 lay vows, 4 main ones, and one branch. Again, the Hinayana or the foundation level motivation is for one's benefit, and the vow lasts for one lifetime, with the exception of if you're taking the Sojong vows. The Mahayana motivation lasts till enlightenment. So the first one is to not kill a human being, not actually doing it, not hiring a hitman, not rejoicing when someone is killed. So all of these are considered killing. Abortion is considered killing. Contraception is not. Killing after being drafted into the army. Later on in Q&A, Rinpoche says that, well, if you're in the heat of a battle, you're going to be highly motivated to kill a person that's trying to kill you. So you will have this motivation of wanting to kill, not being forced to kill. Rejoicing when someone is killed is a problem if you have taken this vow not to kill. It's not quite as serious as actually killing, but it is still a violation of a branch of this vow. The next is not to steal. Quote, not to take anything that is not given to us. It does not belong to us at all, and no one has given us permission to take it. Wanting to steal or even having a strong desire for the object does not break the vow, but it is bending it or maybe putting some dents in it. And he mentions possessions that belong to a family are kind of a gray area. I will say this, that families can have a lot of disagreements and arguing and fighting amongst themselves when, let's say, a parent dies and there is property and inheritance. I also, having spent 5 weeks in the hospital, saw some security, hospital security, and they looked very close to police officers in terms of the equipment that they carried with them. And I asked a staff member one time about that, and I was told that a lot of times they're called into a room where a family is having a disagreement. It might not necessarily be over property, but anyway, families frequently have a lot of arguments going on between the different members. So getting back to these first two, not to kill and not to steal, the motivation is what determines if the vow is completely broken. Accidental death, even under the influence of alcohol or drugs, or being forced to steal, these are just branch violations. It doesn't completely break the vow. Now, the third vow is not to lie. And Rinpoche says this refers to, quote, primarily wearing the mask of Dharma. To continue with the quote, we deceive people to draw their faith and attention to us or to frighten them so they can be under our control. So this is very specific and is primarily about this type of lie. This is about saying that we can prophesize, that we have a great level of realization, that we can see things that other people can't see, or that maybe we can perform miracles or other actions that might frighten people. Now, these actions have to be intentional. Saying things out of ignorance does not violate the precepts. Anyway, if you want to talk about your experiences when meditating or when not meditating and so forth, talk to me, talk to Lama Karma when he is here. Don't spread it around. The fourth one is not indulging in sexual misconduct. So here is another quote. In general, the precept means not having relations with someone protected by the Dharma, someone protected by belonging to another, or someone immature and unprepared. So if you are married, you have sex only with your life partner. And Rinpoche interprets this vow to mean that you can remarry only if your partner dies, not if you divorce. Some other teachers might interpret this differently. Also, it means not having sex with a monastic, as it would break their vow, and not having sex with someone who is married to somebody else. So let's say you are single. Well, that means you cannot have sex with a married person. Also, using force breaks it too. So rape would be breaking the vows. And you might say doing things to come close to forcing the sex, saying things that aren't true to convince them how serious you are about them so that you can go to bed with them. And of course, no sex with a person who has taken sojang vows that day. And then the fifth one is to not take intoxicants. And this includes alcohol and also recreational drugs. And this is a branch vow, but it is very important because it's intended to protect against damaging the other vows. There's a story when the Buddha first gave these vows, he just had the 4 vows, and intoxicants was not included. So his monks would go out into town and would beg for their meals. And this one monk came to a house, and a woman came to the door, and she said, well, I'll gladly give you something to eat, but I find you very attractive. Why don't you come in and we can have sex before I give you your meal? And he said, oh no, that would damage my vows. I can't do that. And she said, well, I was going to cook some goat, but I need to slaughter my goat. And he said, oh no, I can't kill an animal. That would violate my vows. And she said, well, I've got some wine here. Let's have some of that. And he said, oh, that wouldn't violate my vows. And by the time they were done drinking wine, he had killed the goat and had sex with the woman. So when the Buddha heard this, he developed this last vow, this branch vow of avoiding intoxicants, because one drink of alcohol leads to another. And when you are drunk or high on drugs, you're very likely to break one or more of these vows. So that is these 5 precepts. You can take 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, according to what you feel you are capable of doing. You can take any one of them. It's not like you have to take the first one. And if you want to take two, take one and two. You can take any one or any combination. It's up to you. It's all about discipline. It's about drawing lines for yourself, your own behavior, and then not crossing those lines. Quoting Rinpoche here, if we are courageous enough and our minds are open enough to do that, we have the opportunity to take all five. So it takes courage to take any of these vows and a lot of courage to take all five. The benefits of taking the vows and then following them are much, much greater than not taking the vows and yet behaving the same way. Again, to quote Rinpoche, once we have taken the precepts, they are very precious to us, more precious than our lives. So discipline is the basis of having a better rebirth. It's a basis for realization and Buddhahood. And Rinpoche's advice is to take the vows that you feel you can keep. Don't waste your time. Don't waste this life. And don't waste this precious opportunity. Here is another quote that I think is highly motivating. In terms of the effectiveness of the practice of Dharma, there is a 100-fold difference between someone who follows some level of discipline and someone who does not. So all of the favorable conditions are available to take the vows to all of you. We are the ones that are the witnesses of the vows that we take. And this is extremely important. And he talks then about how people that hold the vows are held in veneration. He talks about this tradition of touching one's head to the feet of a holy being. And this has happened to me twice. One time it happened to me in Tibet. I was in a sky burial site outside of Lhasa, and with another person, I was in a group that was traveling through Tibet, and then we later went to Nepal and India. But I was alone with one other Westerner. This other Westerner spoke at least conversational Tibetan to the point where a Tibetan could understand what she said. And we were talking to this monk who was in charge of this sky burial site. And she was explaining to him that we were students of Khenpo Karta Rinpoche. We had both done a 3-year retreat and so on and so forth. And there was a Tibetan woman who looked fairly old, but the sun at the elevation of Tibet really ages a person's skin rapidly. And she probably also had a much harder lifetime than I had. So let's just say she was probably middle-aged. And after we were done speaking to the monk, she said, I have heard of Khenpo Karta Rinpoche, but I have never met him. And then she bent down on her knees and hands and touched her head to my feet. I felt a little bit uncomfortable, but of course I had to let her do that. Another time I was at KTD and I was in the shrine room, and I don't think there were many people in the shrine room, but this large group of people came in. They were a family, and they came and touched their heads to my feet there too. And I talked to them after that, and they were from Bangladesh. And I was surprised because I thought Bangladesh was a Muslim country. And of course it is. But there's one part of Bangladesh where there is a very, very old settlement of Buddhists going way back there. Of course, Theravada, they were here at KTD. And again, this would be a tradition for them. And the idea of this is acknowledging something that is very profound. Again, I felt very uncomfortable. I didn't think I was that profound, but that is the culture. Moving on, confession is the way to purify the vow when they have been broken or bent or dented. That confession renews it. And there are many ways of confessing and purifying when you have broken or bent or dented the vows. A simple one would be to do the Vajrasattva mantra, and more complicated one would be to do the whole Vajrasattva practice in Nundro. It wouldn't be to do the whole practice 108,000 times, but to, just spend maybe an hour doing the practice and saying the mantra. There's a 35 Buddha prayers, which say confession, and there are others too. We can always confess, and it's very important to do that. And it is acknowledging that we have broken the vow, that we regret it. I use a shorthand for confession, so I'll pass this on to you. I call it the 4 R's. The first R is regret. You regret having broken or dented your vow. The second is reliance. You rely on someone who is above you. The Buddha could be Galwan Karmapa. It could be one of your teachers, and so forth. The third is the remedy, which would be saying a prayer, saying the Vajrasattva mantra. And the fourth is resolve, which is you resolve to not do it again. And if you do it again, to again confess. So regret, reliance, the remedy, and resolve are the 4 R's. Another important point is these vows involve renunciation of the causes of suffering. Whereas in samsara, frequently what we want others to renounce the causes of our suffering, what they are doing to cause us to suffer. Now, Dharma Paths was written and published around 1990, 1992. And these talks that are in there were given before that. And Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche talks about relying on the Karmapa. He doesn't say 16th Karmapa. He doesn't say 17th Karmapa. The Karmapa had not been found at this time. He stresses that if you are going to rely on a realized being, then Karmapa would be a good one. But if you have a special relationship with, let's say, Tai Situ Rinpoche or Gyaltsab Rinpoche or another teacher, it's fine to confess to them too. To sum this up, Rinpoche says that we're especially fortunate and it's very auspicious to have the opportunity to take these lay vows from His Holiness Karmapa. Again, he said this before the Karmapa was even found. And right now, the Karmapa is not coming to the United States, so it'd be very difficult to take them directly from him. Now, here are a few question and answer section. Assisted suicide is not good. It's better that the person experience some suffering while dying. And this will purify karma that they won't have to face then in their next life. Painkillers are fine, and comfort care is fine. My experience has been there can be very good hospice care available. Both of my parents were on hospice care, and I felt they got very good care. Question is, killing an evil dictator, does that violate your vow? And his answer is, quote, if your vision were clear and you knew for certain that killing the Shah of Iran would prevent a war, and if you also had compassion for the Shah as well as others, because you knew he would benefit from not causing such harm, that might have been beneficial. I don't know if that came out totally clear, but anyway, to put it in my language, you have to be very careful. It's very tricky, and you can cause harm, even though you might think that what you're doing is beneficial. It would help if you were a bodhisattva too. The question is there a formal ceremony for taking these lay vows like there would be for the refuge? And the answer is yes, there is a formal ceremony that is held. And then the refuge lay vows would be given. And then during the ceremony, you wouldn't have to say, I'm going to take this vow, but not that vow. You would just mentally in your mind take the ones you wanted. The question is, once you take refuge, do you need to take them again? Once you take bodhisattva vows, do you need to take them again? And lay vows, do you reaffirm them and so forth? Well, now this is the answer. And that is, it wouldn't hurt to take refuge again if, let's say, Lama Karma is going to be here at the end of February, and he'll be giving possibly refuge vows before the empowerment. And if he does, you wouldn't have to. It's very seldom done. But if you feel the need to reaffirm them, you could. Now, bodhisattva vows, I would be more inclined to say, take them again. And there are also the long form bodhisattva vows that last a couple of days. I took that long after I had taken the short form bodhisattva vows. And that's good, the long form. I can't do the long form. With the lay vows, if the chance comes to take them again, if you feel that you need to reaffirm them, if you feel they need to go to the body shop, so to speak, take out the dents. There's nothing wrong with that.